and creating prosperity. Just consider the fact, in just the last 30 years, as China and India embraced reforms of their economy to increase economic freedom, literally, just those two countries alone lifted hundreds of millions of people out of the most unimaginable poverty. It's been astounding, and there's so much more that could be done and will happen in those countries as they embrace the principles of capitalism and economic freedom. Okay, so here I've done my little rap about how wonderful capitalism is, how great business is. Oops. And yet, so many people hate capitalism. So many people hate business. And they mistrust business. It's pervasive. Let's look at some statistics here. In Gallup, Roper polls, Harris polls, and Yankovic polls, you can see Americans' confidence in big business has declined to, it got down as low as 16%. It's now about 19%. That means 81% of Americans don't have confidence in big business. That's a pretty astounding statistic if you think about it. There's only one institution in America that has a lower rating than business does. Anybody know what that might be? Congress, exactly. Congress scores 13%. So thank goodness for Congress, we'd be at the very bottom of people's esteem. Only 2% of investors believe CEOs are very trustworthy. That's astounding. I'm a CEO of a pretty large company, and only 2%. I actually think maybe those investors are projecting themselves out on the business side. The Harris poll, 88% of Americans believe big companies have too much influence on government, and that's continued to rise. And 79% believe business is too concerned about making profits and not concerned enough about its responsibilities to workers, consumers, and the environment. Any way you slice it, business, despite all the good that it's done, all the good capitalism's done, people don't like it. In fact, as my friend Ed Freeman, Dr. Ed Freeman, who's a professor at the Darden School in University of Virginia says, and father of stakeholder theory, Ed says, John, there's a meta-narrative about business. I said, Ed, what is that? He says, business sucks. That's the meta-narrative. Business sucks. And that is what most people come to believe, and that explains these polls. And that's what we're up against for business people. We have to deal with that meta-narrative in pretty much everything we do. Why does it happen? How does meta-narrative come about? So I would say the world has changed, people are evolving, and yet the motives of business are very widely misunderstood. People do not understand why business people do what they do. They basically see business people as pretty much, like I think an astounding 90% of all murders that you see on television are committed by businessmen. When in reality, they only commit far less than 1% of the murders. Yet we're the ones that dump in the toxic waste in the rivers. We're the ones that are murdering people, and we're just basically little sociopaths running around, taking everybody's money and sticking it in their own pockets. That's how business has oftentimes been perceived. So it's very interesting, though. Let me talk a little bit about how humanity is evolving from an ethical, social standpoint. My dates are slightly off. I have to go back. It's like 152 years ago. Slavery was still legal in half the United States. That's just 152 years ago. 100 years ago, women did not have the right to vote. Not just in America, but almost anywhere in the whole world. 75 years ago, most of the world was organized through colonial empires, like the British Empire, for example. 55 years ago, the southern United States still had legal segregation, and South Africa still had apartheid. 55 years ago, that's in my lifetime. As a little boy, I remember the civil rights activists, the freedom riders. I was just a kid, but it formed a big part of my childhood as I was growing up in the background. 55 years ago, believe it or not, there was virtually no environmental consciousness, Zippo. You can trace kind of the environmental movement to when Rachel Carson published Silent Spring. That was such an awakening. That was back in 1962. So Those of you that are young, these might seem like long periods of time, but trust me, they are not that long. It's amazing what has happened. We are evolving, and we'll look back on this period 30 or 40 years from now, the people that then will look back on it and say, God, did we really do things like that? For example, did we really treat livestock animals like we treat them? 30 or 40 years from now, I feel certain that people will be thinking about that differently. 30 years ago, communism and socialism were the organizing political philosophies of over half of the planet. That's astounding. And here's the best one everybody in the room can relate to. 20 years ago, there were no smartphones, there were no iPads, there were no iPods. Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Uber didn't even exist. Quick poll, how many people have used Google in the last 24 hours? Raise your hand. Yes. How many people here have a smartphone? Yes. Yeah, well, that's how much the world has changed in just 20 years. Can you imagine how it's going to change in the next 20 years? Probably there are people in this room that are going to make a big impact on evolving and changing our planet, which is exciting to think about. This guy is probably one of the most important people that's been alive in the last 30 years or so, and hardly anybody knows who he is, but Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. And in an act of extreme generosity, he just gave it away. Can you imagine if he'd licensed the World Wide Web and taken a slight royalty of, say, a millionth of a penny for every thing that goes across the World Wide Web? I mean, he'd be a trillionaire. It'd be so astounding. But our world and our lives have changed immensely from this invention, this creation. So today, we're so much better informed than we ever have been before. I mean, I used to have all these debates, and I get so frustrated. Now I just pull on my iPhone, I Google it, and I say, see, I was right, or I put the phone back in my pocket. No, the point is that we're so much better informed. We can find things out so quickly. It's astounding. We're better connected. Look at this. There are now more active phone numbers on the planet than there are people alive. And Facebook, I think my figure's dated. I think they're up like to 1.6 billion active users now. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Flynn effect, but believe it or not, we're actually becoming more intelligent every decade. About every decade, average IQs are going up about 3%. So, and people hear that and they say, nah, that's impossible. And I said, why is that? And he says, there's just so many stupid people. How could that possibly be true? And I said, because if you go back, I said, well, if you went back 100 years ago, you would see there were even more stupid people 100 years ago than there are today. We're better educated, astoundingly better educated. You don't know how fortunate you are, those of you that are students here, to be going to a university like this. Consider the fact that in the year 1900, in the United States, only 15% of adults over the age of 25 had a high school diploma. Only 3% had a college diploma. We are so much better educated than we used to be. We are, and that's part of the reason IQs are going up, besides the impacts of technology. But most importantly, we are becoming more conscious. As a species, we are becoming more awake. We're understanding better the consequences of our actions. We understand we have a greater commitment to the truth. We have a stronger sensitivity towards those who are marginalized or disenfranchised or exploited in some way, from human trafficking to environmental crimes to gay rights to, there's just so much more that we are conscious of than people that were 30 or 40 years ago were conscious of. So I'm going to get down to what is it going to take for corporations, for companies to flourish in the future. And I'm going to argue that to be successful in the future, companies are going to have to be more conscious. They're going to have to exemplify a more conscious way of being. And this leads me to conscious capitalism. So there's 4 tenets we've identified for conscious capitalism: higher purpose, stakeholder integration, conscious leadership, and conscious culture. I'm going to talk about each of these a little bit. Can't get into them quite as deeply as I would like to due to the lack of time. But let's talk about purpose. I'm going to say that businesses need to evolve from thinking about how to maximize their profits to thinking about how to maximize their purpose. Purpose maximization should be what we should be teaching our business schools instead of profit maximization. So you ask the question, what's the purpose of a business? And people, if you go to a cocktail party and you're hanging out with friends, sometimes try this, say, well, what's the purpose of business? And the default answer that you almost always get is, what do you mean, what's the purpose of business? Everybody knows the purpose of business. The purpose of business is to make money, right? That's how we think about it. But if you think a little further, that's such an odd answer, because if you ask what the purpose of a doctor is, it's not to make money. And doctors are very well paid. What's the purpose of doctors? Help heal people. And teachers educate. Architects design buildings. Engineers construct things. Every one of the professions refers back to some type of social good that they're doing in the world, some type of value creation. And yet I argued before that business is the greatest value creator in the world, and yet it's perceived to be only interested in making money. Well, how does it make money? It makes money not because it has a printing press. It makes money because it creates value for people, and the money is made through the voluntary exchange. If you think about the companies you most admire, you will find that every one of them refers back to some type of great purpose. Great companies have great purposes. Now, Plato identified 3 timeless Platonic virtues, which he called the good, the true, and the beautiful. And I'm going to add the heroic onto that. And I would say that great purposes incorporate one or more of these timeless virtues. These inspire humanity. They've inspired us throughout time. We are inspired by a pursuit of truth. We are inspired to do good things, to be caring and compassionate and loving. We are always inspired by the beautiful. The beauty lifts us up. It's like vitamins for our soul. And of course, we're always inspired by heroes who have the courage to really do the right things, even at personal cost to themselves. So some examples, I think, of very purposeful companies. Southwest Airlines, I'm from Texas, they're from Texas, I got them in here. Their higher purpose is giving people the freedom to fly. Now, most people don't know the story of Southwest Airlines, but I will tell you that when Southwest Airlines got going back in the late 60s, we had an incredibly regulated air economy. People were not allowed, airlines couldn't charge what they wanted to charge for flights. That was all regulated by the government. Almost everything they did was completely regulated by the government. It meant that airlines didn't compete on price. They only competed on service amenities. How many drinks you got for free, how good the food was, because they weren't allowed to compete on price. And when airlines were deregulated, Southwest was one of the first startups that went in as a discounter. They began to offer super low fares, and they completely revolutionized the air industry. If there were no Southwest Airlines, I don't know, I just can hardly imagine. I do know when Southwest Airlines got going back in like 1968, only 15% of American adults had ever been in an airplane. Quickly, how many people here have been in an airplane? Raise your hand. Anybody not been in an airplane? I'm just curious. You don't have to. It might be embarrassing to admit that, so it's okay. The point is this directly relates to Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines has given people the freedom to fly because they competed on price, forcing everybody to compete on price, everybody else to compete on price. All types of imitators came out, and they completely changed the world. And now Southwest Airlines' methodology and strategy is completely all over the whole world. Airlines in Europe, in Asia, the deregulation, they've been deregulated as well, and you have this incredibly less expensive air world than what it used to be. Google has a higher purpose. They're the most